All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Author Talk. We are here today to talk about the Just YA authors and the beautiful pieces that have been gathered in this open education resource that is free to teachers and free to students at Open OkState online. And then you can also get a lovely paperback copy if you wished. But we are here today with Erin Murphy, and so we want to welcome her, and we're going to listen to her read some of her pieces in the collection and get to know some of the inspiration behind. So welcome, Erin.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah. Would you
So
like
tell
for me
us
to
a little
start
bit
by...
about you. Where are you in the
Oh,
world?
okay.
Yeah.
I am coming to you from central Pennsylvania. I teach at Penn State Altoona. And yeah, some of the pieces, one in particular actually is sort of based in this area that I'm talking to you from. So we'll talk about that a little bit.
Okay. And what is your story of being a writer? Can you tell us just a little bit about how you came to be named writer and to embrace this role?
Yes, absolutely. So I knew I wanted to be a writer starting in second grade. And it was because I read a 200-page book and I was very pleased with myself. And it happened to be the autobiography of Louisa May Alcott. And she was a writer, and that made me want to be a writer. And one thing that I've appreciated more as I've become an adult and also a parent is the fact that my mother, who was a first generation college student, who then went on to be a high school English teacher and then later a principal and a language arts coordinator for her district, she never tried to discourage me. So when I would say, what are you in second grade? Like seven. I was 7 years old saying, I want to be a writer. And other people would say, oh, ha ha ha, what are you really going to do, to make a living? My mother never discouraged me. She would always say, great, that's what you're going to be. You're going to be a writer. And even when that writing turned mostly to poetry, she didn't try to discourage me. And so that was really helpful for me when I became a parent myself, too, that whatever it was that my kids had a passion for and an aptitude for, I just really tried to encourage instead of trying to mold them into whatever I thought they should be doing. And as a college professor myself, I see that a lot of times, right? I see students coming in where their parents say, you have to be a business major or you have to major in engineering, even though they don't necessarily have an interest or an aptitude for it. And then maybe after they've flunked that certain math class like 3 times, then sometimes the parents say, okay, just get a degree. And then maybe they might find the thing that they're more interested in. But it would be nice if all parents were supportive that way.
Mm. Yes, yes. And to have somebody not question you or make you feel bad or second guess those, like what would happen if this was your dream and we just encourage everyone to follow that dream. Yeah.
Right, right,
Unfortunately, there's lots of
absolutely.
realities and stories behind the reasons why. But what a joy that your mom encouraged you and that you were able to pursue a career that let our paths cross and for you to create these beautiful pieces for our collection. And how did you find out about the Just YA opportunity?
I believe it was an email from you. So yeah, that was very nice of you to reach out, and I happen to have several pieces that seemed like they would fit with your aim for the anthology, which I have to say is just a very exciting project because I think there's so many, in this case, 7 through 12 teachers who can use free access. A lot of times the books they don't have the to update them regularly, or there's only a certain type of textbook they have the budget for. And so for them to have free access to this anthology, I think will open up a whole world of literature in these genres for the students in those grades, and not just in the United States, but I think around the world. So it's really exciting, and I congratulate you on conceiving of this project, but then also actually making it happen, which are two different things.
It is, and I think like that's, we're certainly dependent on the generosity of other authors, to contribute something for free because there's no money backing the project. And of course, already authors don't get paid very much at all. But I think, your work with flash fiction and your work with poetry or flash creative nonfiction, I think this is a genre as a teacher that I'm always looking for short pieces that are relevant and approachable to our youth.
Hmm.
There's a lot of flash fiction on the internet, and there's some of those collections like Brevity, for example. But not everything in there is appropriate or relevant in the lives of sixth graders, seventh graders,
Right,
middle and high school students. But they need to see genres in the length that we're asking them to write. If
right,
we're
right,
asking students to write these personal narratives or fiction essays, we're not asking for 10 and 15-page chapters that might go into an anthology. Like
right,
there's no time to write it. There's no time to read 180 of them. Like I had 180 students when I taught junior high, and if they're all writing 20 pages, like how do you
right,
workshop all of that?
right. Yeah,
We need mentor texts of short form so that our students can see how it lives in the world from craftful writers. And so that's
yeah,
where I started reaching out to maybe people who didn't traditionally write young adults to say, like, what do you have that could work here? So that
right.
we can have some mentor texts in the classroom.
Yeah, no, it was such a great idea. And just last night, I have a former student who's now getting her PhD in creative writing, and she had posted on social media that she was looking for some pieces that would be appropriate for middle school students because she was about to go into a middle school to do some creative writing exercises, workshops with these students. And so I posted the link, to this anthology, and she was delighted. She said, "This is exactly what I'm looking for." So that kind of one-stop shopping for people who do it full time, but also those of us who are writers who occasionally get asked to go into junior high and high school classes. I serve as a poet laureate for my county, Blair County, so I go into the schools a lot. And I worked for years as a poet in the schools in the state of Maryland. So I know how hard it can be. Like when you find like a piece that you know is going to work well for that age group, you just like make sure you hang on to it, because not like you said, not every piece is appropriate for various reasons. Sometimes length, sometimes subject matter, lots of reasons. And so to have a whole collection in various genres, I think is just really exciting and it's going to be so useful.
Thank you so much. Like we're finding that also, yeah. And I can see potential for other volumes as we move forward. So now that we know that it exists, we can start thinking about writing for the audience.
Right.
Well, let's hear some of your work. Where
Okay.
should we begin?
Okay, so I'm going to start with this poem of mine that's called Illuminated. And before I read it, I'll just explain a little bit about the form. So it's 7 lines, and it's a demi-sonnet, which is a form that I invented. There you go. You can see it right there. Maybe pull it back a little. It was a little
Yeah.
blurry, but yeah.
I will also put the
All
like,
right. There we
yeah,
go.
and there'll be like I'll put all the links to these in the comment section
Great.
below so everyone can access them. Yeah.
Great. So that
Okay.
gives you an idea of what it looks like on the page. And I should just give a shout out to Northern Appalachian Review, which published this originally in March 2022. Illuminated. The night of the closest supermoon in 70 years. I scrolled through Facebook posts of friends' photos. Peter's was best. The moon floated above a red barn in roaring spring, like an illuminated balloon without a string. I'm ashamed to say how long it took me to look outside at the real thing. So I was interested in this idea, and I'm probably not the only one that's had this happen where you see, some like marvel of nature on like social media, and then you're just, there with the screen without realizing, hey, like there's a natural world right outside my window or outside my home that I could go see. And I thought it was a commentary. It's amusing, but it's also kind of a serious commentary on how sometimes, we don't look up enough from our screens, whether it's social media or other work that we're doing, and like experience the world itself, outside of this virtual world that we've created.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. And I think, as a writer, or well, as a teacher of writers, I think I always think about like, how is this a mentor text to invite? Like I should say like I am interested in reading poetry with students, but I'm more interested in students writing poetry.
Sure.
And having a poem that says I have something to say back to this, or I have something similar, right? So it
Mhm.
wasn't the moon, it was something else,
Right.
where I realized like I have that food in my kitchen too, or I have a mother who can show me how to make that, or I have a dog who's just as precious. um, and I think so I'm looking at this, and I love that, but I also am like thinking about your demi-sonnet here.
Right. So I do a
And
lot of workshops with, students, K through 12 students, and also, adult like writers, master classes on the demi-sonnet because it is something that's really manageable to do in a short workshop. Like you could write an entire poem in a 1 hour workshop, doing a demi-sonnet. And I've done that before. Sometimes people have come out with three of them, in that amount of time, which is exciting. Um, One thing that I found works really well with this format. So let's say you had a class where you were having students write longer poems. What you could then do is take that longer poem and have them create a demi-sonnet out of it. So, which is a really great exercise, not just for poetry writing, but for writing in general, because it really gets you focusing on concision, on editing, line editing. So let's say they've written, a 5 page paper, but really needs to be a 3 page paper. Practicing getting a 20-line poem down to a 7 line poem can be practice for that, right? It's kind of enacting the same process. And so that's one way that I like to do it with workshops. I'll have students come in and bring in an existing poem and then create a demi-sonnet out of it. There are really only a couple of rules for the demi-sonnet. One is that it needs to be 7 lines, and then the other is that it needs to end with a rhyme. But it doesn't have to be an obvious rhyme. So sometimes you'll see that last word will be a slant rhyme or what we call a near rhyme, like an almost rhyme. And it might be rhyming with something earlier, like in the middle of a line. In this case, it's a full rhyme, what we would call a full rhyme, right? String and thing. But you see, string is a little bit hidden in there, right? It's not where the word, I'm ashamed to say how long is what ends that, previous line. That's what you think the rhyme where you think the rhyme would be, right? But it happens to be kind of hidden there. And it can really be anywhere in the poem. And I have a lot of other demi-sonnets published online with free access for people if they want to check them out. And then a lot of other people have taken on the form and published them too. So if you search demi-sonnet, you can find a lot of them. And you can kind of see how people have played with that rhyme. But those are the only two rules, really. 7 lines, and then it needs to end with a full or a slant rhyme. Other than that, subject matter wise, I like for them to be almost aphoristic in nature. So if you think about an aphorism or like a fortune cookie, kind of like an elongated fortune cookie, it kind of gives you some sort of commentary on the world, right? And so that's what I'm looking for in these poems. I've published 3 collections of demi-sonnets so far, and each of them have a slightly different focus. For instance, this collection, Assisted Living, these poems have to do with the life cycle and with caregiving. And the last third of the book has to do, they're all demi-sonnets about my late mother-in-law, who was a concert pianist who lived to be 99 years old. And so they kind of go through like a lot of her life when she was, a musician and in her later years and then the caregiving years for her. So there's no limit to the subject matter that you can use for a demi-sonnet. And I think that people get really excited when they discover it because, again, there's that kind of instant gratification that you can create a poem in a brief amount of time and then and hopefully have it like pack a little bit of a punch.
Yeah, it certainly does. I love it. Okay, shall we try something else? Which else?
Yep.
Where should we go next?
Yeah, so I'm going to read Erased next.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you a little bit about this. I use an epigraph, so a little explanation at the beginning of the poem that kind of sets up the poem. And what I'm setting up is the fact that the poem is an erasure poem, which means that you take an existing text and then you choose certain words in the order in which you appear, but you're erasing other words between them to create new meaning. So sometimes it's a whole new meaning, sometimes it's a commentary on the original meaning of the text that was created. So in this case, here's the epigraph. The poem is called Erased. And the epigraph is an erasure created from the text of a July 3rd, 2021 Washington Post article on the planned demolition of the collapsed Champlain Towers condominium in Surfside, Florida. So, for those of you who remember that collapse, it happened in June of 2021. And, a lot of what was attributed to this collapse had to do with climate change and erosion and rising sea levels, which then, led to the foundation and everything being compromised. And so it was a tragedy, not because of just because of the loss of the building, but because of the loss of life. And then it also, opened up the possibility that this could happen elsewhere, that it wasn't just a one-off situation. So when I read this Washington Post article, I became interested in that sort of the backstory of it, not just the fact reporting on, yes, they're going to demolish, these towers, but on this whole idea of climate change. And so the poem is Erased. What is left is fragile. Wind, rain, and fire move faster. A cost is coming to the coast. Flooding, wreckage, disaster. Can we make revisions to a month, a day, a morning? Collapse time, the need to be in motion? Hope, memory, everyone we know. That is what's left. What's left to implode. And I should mention that this was published originally in Ecotone magazine in March of 2023.
Hmm. So what stands out to you when you read it again?
Well, one thing that I wanted to look up before I talked to you was how many words the original article was,
Hmm.
and then how many I ended up with. And so I checked yesterday. The article was 1,801 words. And then the finished poem is 53 words. So, and there's no rule about that, right? You could create an erasure, say, from 100-word text and have, 50 words. Um, but it was interesting to go back and to look at that original and to look back at the words that I chose, which now we can do so easily with like the search function on a computer. So I was able to just go through and find like highlighted like my poem basically as I went through. I should also mention that uh, people choose to do erasures in different ways, and I've done it, you know, multiple ways. But one way is the way I did it, where it's just the words that I chose are there on the page, and then I explain it's an erasure in the epigraph. But you can actually do it as what we call a blackout poem, where you have the original text and then you're blacking out everything except the words that you're keeping. In this case, with an 1,800 word piece. That would have taken up your whole anthology or
Right.
a lot of it. So in this case, I choose to just use the words. But when it's a shorter text, I'm working on an anthology right now for Wesleyan University Press, and one of my erasure blackout poems is part of that anthology, and uh, and it's shorter, so it fits on a page, and it really is striking to see that, and just see all that black and then the words that you've chosen on that.
Yeah. Well, I think that that is those decisions are important too, right? Whether you see the absence or you're wiping away
Hmm.
with color and then the white comes through in the text, or you're
Hmm.
removing that and you have the white space on the page. You know,
Right.
and I think here it calls to mind what's missing, the absence, because there's so much
Exactly.
white space on the page for that, right? And it's less dark. It's kind of like this is what the remains that are lifted off.
Yeah,
the
yeah, that's a
pages
good
are helpful.
observation. And I felt like the form of erasure was appropriate for the subject matter
Yeah.
because that's what's happening, with these climate change events, right? It's leading to an erasure, of land and sometimes whole populations, species, et cetera. And so I wanted to call attention to that with the form. I will say though that for working with students, erasure is another fun activity that you can do in a short amount of time. So, if you're collecting things like, old magazines or, any kind of, old text that you might have, and then you're letting students use that page. If everybody has like a ripped out page and you let them use it and create their own poem from that existing text, that can be really exciting. You could also do it like you could do an erasure poem just based on the Just YI anthology,
Mhm.
right? So there might be like a story in there, and maybe the students create an erasure poem out of that story,
Yeah.
or out of several stories. I have an erasure series from Moby Dick, that's like a series of poems
Mhm.
that are erased from there. So you could do it from, whatever text you happen to have in a classroom. It might be available to the students. It can work. And I think it's less intimidating, especially for students who are first writing poems. Poems tend to be the most intimidating of the different genres. It's less intimidating because you're not just looking at a blank page or a blank screen and told, create, here, be brilliant, You've actually got an existing text you can work from. And so it can kind of ease you into the process of writing.
Yeah. Well, I think your both poems so far are like exercises in revision or revisioning in a way.
Mhm.
And thinking about precise word choice, and a lot of times teachers want to teach that too, or thinking about economy of words. So I can
Mhm.
see so far, even just like your two pieces so far, can be a nice little unit of instruction, like right there for you. We have it for you, teachers.
Right.
Um,
Well, then the third one I'm going to
yes.
read will just, brings all of that together,
Yep.
Sarah. So this is a good transition. So this is a creative nonfiction essay, and a lot of my students, even in college, aren't familiar with creative nonfiction. Like they've heard of creative writing, they've heard of fiction, they've heard of nonfiction, but they're not really sure what this is. And what I tell them, it's sort of like poetry and fiction like had a baby. And creative nonfiction kind of combines them. So you're using a lot of the elements of both. So you might have, imagery and economy of language and the types of tools we use, simile and metaphor and other things. But you've also got character development a lot of times. You might have dialogue. Um, the difference between this and fiction, of course, is that creative nonfiction is true, right? So there's the expectation that everything actually happened, or at least is true to the author's best recollection, right, of how they perceive it. And so this is a creative nonfiction piece. And what you can't see when I'm reading it out loud is that every other section is in plain text, and every other section that starts with the word correction is in italics.
Mhm.
So it goes back and forth. That's the formatting on the page, and it's called Slow Burn. The day my brother nearly burns down the house, I am sitting on the living room floor. Correction. It's not a house, but an apartment. My father's first since the divorce. I am playing with Lincoln logs on the burnt orange shag carpet, building and rebuilding a perfect house with a green roof. Correction. I'm not playing. I'm killing time until we're returned to our real home with our real toys and our real parent. My father is taking a nap in the apartment's only bedroom. Correction. It's not a nap, but his usual stupor, a label for which we won't have for years. I see the fire out of the corner of my eye. Correction. What I see first is the shadow puppet of a fire performing on the kitchen wall. Mesmerized, I watch for the better part of a minute before investigating its cause. When I crane my neck around the corner, I see my 2-year-old brother waving a brown paper bag that he has dipped in the lit burner of the gas stove. Pretty, he exclaims. Pretty, pretty. Correction. He can't pronounce pretty. He says, pity. I knock the burning bag from my brother's hand and scream for our father, who bolts from the bedroom and douses the flames. Correction. Our father doesn't respond until I shake him awake. He extinguishes the fire with a pot of cold, 2-day-old coffee. My brother's exclamations soften to a whisper. Pity, pity, pity. No correction necessary.
Hmm.
So
Erin.
I thought this is a good one to end with because as you observed, a lot of it has to do with sort of revision, right? My writing has to do with that idea of observing revision, and in this case, the essay is literally revising what's been written previously, right? Sort of a contrapuntal, if you think about contrapuntal in music, but also contrapuntal poetry, where it's a counterpoint. So you have the one thing, and then you have the counterpoint with the other. And I was interested in that for this particular piece. A lot of times when you try to reconstruct, what your inspiration was, of course, like your kid brother almost burning the house down, like that can be inspiration in itself. But a lot of times it comes for me from language. And so for me, it was remembering that he used to say pretty pity, right? And then thinking about that in the context of this fire. And that's when it really sort of took shape. But I liked this contrapuntal approach of, the one thing and then the correction because I thought it highlighted, for one, the difference between that child experience of something or the child view and then the adult view when you have that kind of, more of a vantage point on what it was and you look back and you go, "Oh my God, I can't believe we even survived that." Um, but the other thing that I think it highlights is how things seem on the surface versus how they are. And I think there's so many young people who have that experience of everything seems fine from the outside to the neighbors, maybe even to teachers. And yet, behind closed doors, they might be dealing with some really difficult situations. Whether there are substances involved or neglect or abuse, all kinds of things can be going on. And so I think that the format of, here's what it seems like, here's the reality, I think speaks to that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think a lot of the reasons people don't hear about what creative nonfiction or don't hear that and think, what is that? Is because in the public schools, they call it personal narrative.
Hmm.
And they don't think about it as creative.
Hmm.
They don't think of it as nonfiction. Sometimes they even call it an essay instead of a story, you know.
Right, right.
And there's not a lot of, again, mentor text for what this looks like for what we expect students to see. And so I was thrilled that you submitted this because I think this is precisely a sort of mentor text I would want alongside a few others in this book, and to say, let's read several of these and notice how they all look quite different. What speaks to you? What helps you tell your story? What helps you think I have something like this and this format would really help me? I didn't know I could do this with italics.
Right.
I didn't know I could offer a little zooming in, zooming out. I didn't know that was possible because no one ever taught me how to do that.
Right, right. And even things like that you can suggest a whole family dynamic, like, child of divorce with like a sentence, you
Yes.
know, that you don't need to spend whole paragraphs explaining, well, my parents separated when I was 7, they got divorced, and I know that, like you don't have to go into all that detail. You can give just a little sort of like hint, and then it creates a whole world for
Yeah.
you. I would say also that for teachers who are interested in this type of, brief creative nonfiction, the Brevity, the online journal, is excellent and also free and available. They'll want to read it first to make sure they're choosing appropriate pieces. And then Brevity also has a Best of Brevity anthology, and I'm lucky to have a piece in that as well. And that's my essay, White Lies.
Mhm.
And that one gets taught a lot, both in high school and also in college. And I get like, emails from instructors and teachers and students, from around the country about that particular essay. Um, a funny story about that is that when my own kids were in high school, it was in the textbook that their teacher was using in high school. And so my kids had to talk about their mom's essay in their class. My daughter likes to joke that she was walking down the hallway and one of the kids says to her, I got a C on that essay about your mom's, I mean, a C on the quiz about your mom's essay. Thanks a lot.
Uh-huh. I love it. I love it.
And
Yeah,
they
I think
just were
like
just like, thanks, Mom.
it is. Yes, I think, I'm so glad that you mentioned that because I think that's actually how I found you because I was reading through Brevity and I was like, I want to reach out to the authors here because they must have some short pieces. And just for that reason, right? So it's approachable, it's readable. It's that, like you said, it's that one, the story that it's kind of your go-to as a teacher that can do things for hearts and minds and writers, which is why I'm so grateful that you've been with us today to share. I wonder if
My
you could
pleasure.
say a little bit about what's next for you, or you mentioned that you are working on an anthology right now. What other
Mhm.
things are kind of on your plate?
Yeah. So my brand new book, Fluent in Blue, is this side, Fluent in Blue, just came out in April, and this is a collection of poems. That I'm really excited about. It uses blue as a color, but also like when we think about blue, like, music and emotion and mental health and, so many other things. So that's the sort of the continuous sort of thread throughout the book is blue. And then, yeah, I'm working on this anthology of documentary poetry. And documentary poetry is another thing that a lot of students haven't heard of, but might be of interest to them. So it's any kind of poetry that's based on other documents, research, but it can also refer to things like cento poems, which are poems created from lines by other poets. CENTO. People might want to look that up as an exercise to do with students as well. And erasure poems, as I mentioned, are in that collection. And then I have a book coming out from Salmon Poetry in Ireland. That's coming out in January, and that's called Human Resources. So that's what I that's what I have on my plate right now, in addition to my
Wonderful.
teaching.
Well, I'm like searching these up right now so I can make sure to put all of the links into the comment section below so people can find you and read more.
Yeah, and my website is erin-murphy.com. So you can find a lot of other poems that are in online journals. That's some sort of one-stop shopping for some of that work as well.
Wonderful. Oh, thank you so much. Well, it has been a joy to be with you, Erin. Thank you so much for
You too,
joining
Sarah.
us. And we hope to continue to read more of your wonderful work in the future.
Thank you, and congratulations again on this brilliant anthology.
Thank you so much.